Hey, so maybe let's briefly start because the people can join us a bit later if they're late. Maybe some guests are also having Thanksgiving, so they might be. I mean, it's still before the party, so I still have time for that. But yeah, today I'm really happy to host this meeting with Oliwia Mandrela, who will talk about the quest for longevity, biotechnological revolution, and public reason, which is a topic really up to date, especially if you are into the biotechnological sciences. This is something that is up at the top of the agenda on that. So yeah, I'm really happy to see Oliwia's work ongoing and making another steps into this. So yes, Oliwia, I'm really happy to be here and to listen and to join those discussions. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Tadeusz, for giving me the opportunity to present. And thank you all for joining us today. I am actually quite hopeful that being in a smaller group will help us to have a more robust discussion in the end. Let's start. So today I am presenting a part of my Preludium project titled The Quest for Longevity, Biotechnological Revolution and Public Reason. The aim of this work is to understand how emerging longevity biotechnology and geroscience are being framed, justified, and debated across scientific, political, and public domains. So what I will show you today is the first empirical component, a systematical literature review that maps how societal aspects of geroscience and longevity biotechnology are currently discussed in the scientific discourse. Let me start with introducing one of the most interesting ideas that has increasingly spanned across life sciences for the last 10 years. So the geroscience hypothesis is the core idea driving the entire field of geroscience and longevity biotechnology. And it proposes that if we target the biological processes that cause aging, we can delay the onset of multiple age-related diseases at once, rather than treating them individually as it is today. So in other words, instead of fighting Alzheimer's, cancer, cardiovascular disease, etc. separately, we intervene upstream in the shared mechanisms that drive them. At least that is the idea behind it. So also 2 words worth explaining in the beginning. So this literature review will address 2 disciplines, geroscience and longevity biotechnology. They are very closely connected, but they operate at different levels of knowledge production system, because geroscience is fundamentally a discovery science. It tries to understand what aging is, which mechanisms matter, how these mechanisms connect across tissues, diseases, etc. And longevity biotechnology is the effort to translate those insights into tangible interventions like senolytics, mTOR inhibitors, epigenetic reprogramming, etc. So we can say that together they form a pipeline. Geroscience generates the ideas and longevity biotechnology tries to operationalize them. And here, just for an illustration, you can see 3 press releases that show geroscience or longevity biotechnology in the media. So headlines like Benjamin Button effect or age reversal pill by 2035 frame the early stage mouse results as human breakthroughs. So we can see pictures of mice that have been rejuvenated or made older, and references to cultural images like the Benjamin Button effects. But we can also see questions concerning the future of this discipline and whether these effects will be translated into humans. Sometimes we can also see suggestions that it is just behind the corner or that it has already been translated, but this is rather clickbait than actual state of longevity biotechnology. But I think having this context in mind is very interesting and important because it also frames how geroscience develops and how the public perception of it is today. Okay, so now when we have a basic understanding of what geroscience and longevity biotechnology are and how they are portrayed in media, let's transition towards the methodological assumptions of my project. So first I will present the doctoral project structure, the broader project, and then we will focus on the systematic literature review. That is the topic of today's presentation. So as I mentioned, the review is embedded in the broader project, and the project aims to understand how visions, values, and ways of reasoning about longevity biotechnology are co-produced across not only scientific, that we'll discuss today, but also political and public domains, and how these interactions reshape what counts as life, its boundaries, and its entitlements. So this slide summarizes the conceptual framework guiding the project. So it shows how 5 domains that are being analyzed in the study, along with the theoretical concepts that support them. The goal here is to make clear what kind of phenomena we are examining. So we have several subjects of analysis in several theoretical concepts used to capture these subjects. So I want to see what collective visions of futures concerning technological development are present in the public sphere. And for this, I am using the concept of sociotechnical imaginaries developed by Professor Sheila Jasanoff. I also aim to understand the collective ways of reasoning and justifying and legitimizing what counts as facts, what counts as the truth, and what counts as, for example, science in here. And for this, I am using the concept of civic epistemologies. And then one of the other aims of my project is to see what changes in the definitions of life and its entitlements might emerge from the field of geroscience and longevity biotechnology. And for this, I am using the concept of bioconstitutionalism. And to this, I am also paying attention to risk and uncertainty. What is being framed as risk and what is being manufactured as uncertainty while geroscience and longevity biotechnologies are being developed. Can you see the whole slide? Because it seems at my screen like it's cut.
Until the in-depth interviews, I guess. I can see at least.
Okay. Okay, so it's cut. So I will just tell you what is what should be in here. Basically here I am trying to show where in the whole project this part is embedded. So there are 3 parts of the project. First is document analysis. Then the second one is in-depth interviews. And then the third one will be ethnographies. So now we are in the first part of the project, which is document analysis. In the first part of it, which is scientific publications analysis. And for this, I am using the scientific literature review, and we will focus only on this part today. But I would like to ask you to keep in mind the further steps that will take place in the future, because it would be very valuable for me to hear from you any suggestions for the future steps of this research. So, for example, if you see that some approaches, topics, perspectives are not present in what I am presenting today, but in your opinion should be or could enrich the project, you can keep in mind that I will have a few more steps in the empirical research, where I can include it. So I would be very grateful to hear it at this stage, where it's still quite, the project is still quite flexible and open to modifications methodologically to some degree. Just to finish this, I want to share that after this scientific literature review, what I have planned is, firstly, legal landscape regulations analysis, then press materials analysis. And these three steps together constitutes for document analysis. And I have these three types of sources to analyze how three important discourses, which is scientific, legal, and let's say popular culture, correspond and co-shape and represent geroscience and longevity biotechnology. And after this, I will go in the field and confront it with the perspectives of people who actually contribute to this field actively. So scientists, policymakers, NGO representatives, and other relevant actors. And I will ask them questions to somehow see how what they think about longevity biotechnology and its development, and all the questions embedded in the project, how it corresponds to what is visible in the written discourse. And then I will also join some scientific conferences, and I will go to a lab and see how these imaginaries, how these civic epistemologies, etc., play in everyday work and are employed in the everyday action of longevity biotechnology production. Okay, and now in this section, I'll walk you through the methodology of this systematical literary review. And I will outline how the material was selected, how it was analyzed, and how the combined human and AI-assisted approaches allowed me to map the dominant themes, imaginaries, risks, and uncertainties in the scientific literature on geroscience and longevity biotechnology. So this review examines geroscience and longevity biotechnology-based approaches to aging control and life extension, so therefore excluding lifestyle or conventional medical methods. It focuses on knowledge and technologies that aim to manipulate biological age and analyze how social aspects are represented in scientific literature. And the review aims to identify how these social dimensions of longevity biotechnology are conceptualized in current research. It highlights the main themes and values that structure scientific and societal discussions about extending life and health. The analysis seeks to outline how these technologies are embedded within broader visions of health, progress, good life, and the future of human aging. So this review was guided by one main question, which is, what is the current state of knowledge on the societal aspects of longevity biotechnology? And to unpack this, I also look at 5 complementary questions, identifying which societal themes are present, which disciplines engage with life extension, how risk and uncertainty are conceptualized, what ethical and social issues are highlighted, and where are the key research gaps. And maybe one more thing that I want to add before presenting the results is that analyzing all the societal aspects that are present within longevity biotechnology and geroscience literature, I came to quite a broad spectrum. So I see it more like a good starting point for further research, and also this is more to map like what themes are present and what are not. So there are many topics, not all of them deeply analyzed, but the main goal is to have a map, an idea of the landscape of ideas, perceptions, and perspectives that are present in geroscience. And also to, I think this enables to reflect on the current state of relationship and let's say the flow of ideas between geroscience and social sciences and humanities. And I think this is a good base to reflect also critically on how it can be improved, what can be added, and what ideas could be transferred but perhaps are not, or what ideas could be added but for some reason perhaps are absent in this discourse. So, so this systematic literature review was reported according to PRISMA 2020 guidelines, and the database chosen was Scopus. The search period was from the beginning, which is 2021 to 2025. And the document type that I've selected to this review are articles, reviews, book chapters, and editorials, all in English. And the number of publications after selection is 104. Briefly, the inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. So I included only publications that did two things simultaneously. First, they had to address geroscience and longevity biotechnology, of course, and as well, they had to address some societal aspects. So I developed a list of societal aspects, and I had quite a complicated query to Scopus. It had three parts. The first part aimed at identifying articles addressing geroscience. Then with an end, the second part was searching for the societal aspects, such as ethical, legal, political, religious, or societal implications of life extension research. And then I also had a third part, which was exclusions, for example, organ transplants, etc., because that was not in the scope. And then, so articles that were about geroscience and societal aspects at the same time were included. And exclusion criteria, if the article was from a non-geroscience angle, because there's a huge database on aging from all the possible perspectives, but even in life sciences, aging is such a vast topic. So I chose only those articles that took the geroscience perspective, and often they just refer to geroscience directly. They use this word, or longevity biotechnology. Sometimes they use the word or the phrase radical life extension. And for example, in here we have some literature from transhumanism. As you can imagine, they sometimes address broader interventions, not only geroscience, but also other propositions in radical life extension. But I kept it in here because I find it very relevant. I think it provides a broader cultural and ideological context from where these ideas even come from. Okay, but back to the exclusion criteria. If it was non-geroscience or addressed solely some technical aspects without any reference to any societal dimensions, these articles were excluded because I think they just they couldn't really say much about the societal aspects if they don't address it. So specific inclusion reasons were a few of them. Firstly, if an article had any ethical and societal implications. Secondly, some articles, as I mentioned, addressed it from the, let's say, historical background of transhumanism. Then some articles addressed the ecological issues potentially connected with longevity biotechnology development. Then some articles also addressed many governance issues or funding. Then some articles, I think they were relevant to analyze from the lens of bioconstitutionalism because, for example, they delivered definitions of aging or definitions of how they see the role of geroscience in defining what is a good life and good society. And then some articles presented some visions of the future of geroscience or of society, etc. And then, as I mentioned, excluded non-longevity biotechnology and no societal aspects. So 104 documents were selected, and then not all of them were analyzed in the same way, because only 50 of them, I mean, only, but also as much as, because it was quite, I think, a big sample to analyze. So 50 documents addressed the societal aspects as the main subject of analysis. And those documents I've read, it was close reading and coding in MaxQDA according to a previously developed coding tree, which was also expanded and enhanced and restructured during coding to actually reflect what is present in the documents. And then 54 documents were partly dedicated to the analyzed topic. So the societal aspect analyzed was not their main topic, but it was like a very big part of the analysis, so it was also included. And these 54 documents were added to a secondary analysis, which was AI supported. To summarize, I have read 50 documents closely, and then I have also combined them with the other 54 and used AI-supported analysis to add some context that was not present in my analysis, to also double check if my initial conclusions were supported by the AI-driven analysis, and to have a broader picture of a bigger data set. Okay, so I am aware that it is barely visible, but still I wanted to show you the titles of the main corpus, and then the titles very briefly of the additional part. Of course, this is available on request and will be added to the article that will be a result of this review, if you would like to have a closer look of what was included in the analysis. And when it comes to the selected documents, as you can see, we can see that before 2021, that before 2021, there was no like stable trend about how often something was published. So this plot shows how the field has grown over time. And before 2015, publications touching on societal aspects of geroscience were actually, we can say, extremely rare. But starting around 2018, and especially 2020, we see a sharp acceleration. So the peak is connected with last year, reflecting an intensified debate and demonstrating stable growth of the topic over the past few years. The retrieved articles are dated up to August this year. So I think we can expect that the total number of articles for this year might also exceed all previous years and support the growth trend, because we also only have some part of 2025 reflected in here, and we already had 13 articles published. So I think we can summarize that we are looking at a young but rapidly expanding research landscape. This is also correlated with the development of geroscience itself, because the hallmarks of aging, which is a foundational article in geroscience, was published in 2013. And we can see that before 2013, there were only no articles on the societal aspects of geroscience and longevity biotechnology, but then there is a growing trend, which I also think is a good sign that social sciences and humanities are growingly, although the numbers are not, enormous, as you can see, but growingly they are entering the discussion about radical life extension. So when it comes to the type of the documents, 74 of them were articles. But what is very important to mention here is that actually very little of these 74 articles were what we usually think of as an article. Many of these documents were quite short, even 3 or 7 pages long, and they were rather like perspective papers or some kind of comments rather than full, empirical research articles, which is also very interesting. And I think it also shows us a little bit about the, let's say, field, which is SSH / Geroscience. So I interpret it as that the perspective from social sciences and humanities is not well embedded yet, and it is only trying to enter the broader debate through the form of a perspective paper or a shorter editorial or a different kind of a comment or voicing the ideas than a full research paper. So I think it's also a kind of characteristic for the initial period of the conversation that we are observing now. Okay, so as I mentioned, the document analysis was close reading by me, 50 documents, and then the whole corpus is 104, and it's AI assisted analysis. And I aimed at mapping the key themes. So I focus on the goals, the reasons, the values, and the visions of the future present in geroscience, or in different comments on geroscience, different voices that are trying to address the goals and reasons and values from maybe a bit different perspective than the dominant one. Then what are the hopes, the risks, uncertainties, but also the policy and legal regulations and implications, but as well definitions and meanings, potentially changing meanings of aging. Okay, so in the following slides, I will present the main findings of the analysis. I will begin with the scientific and technological orientation of the field, and then moving into the societal, ethical, and governance aspects that emerge from the literature. So we can start from quite a simple, but I think still quite interesting word cloud that reflects how the scientific and semi-scientific literature, such as the commentaries, frames aging, geroscience, and longevity biotechnology. So the prominence of certain terms tells us a great deal about the conceptual terrain that dominates this field. So the most central and visually dominant terms are aging, life, health, but also disease and longevity. This already signals that the scientific discourse consistently positions aging both as a biological process and as a health-related condition, often aligned with disease frameworks. It suggests that longevity biotechnology is usually discussed not in isolation, but in relation to medicalized narratives of health span, lifespan, and disease prevention. This is directly relevant to our main research question about how societal aspects are represented. So the field conceptually merges aging with health and illness, which carries significant ethical and political implications. Around these core terms, we also see biological, cell, genetic, epigenetic mechanisms, senescence, clinical, and trials. These highlight the literature is strongly rooted in biomedical and molecular perspectives, indicated that geroscience is still predominantly described through the lens of biology and translational research. It corresponds to our complementary question about what scientific disciplines dominate. Clearly, life sciences and medical sciences are the central ones. At the same time, words like population, but here we can add that population is often used in terms of, for example, cell population or study population, so might also miss the human aspect, really. But let's continue. At the same time, words like population, but also public, risk, social, expectancy, older, years, women, humans, etc., points to the presence of broader social themes. These terms suggest an awareness, at least, of demographic trends, public health implications, and the diversity of aging populations. So we will see a little bit more in the following slides. So, importantly, the appearance of terms like risk, uncertainty, mortality, and stress implies that discussions about risk are indeed present, but embedded primarily in biological or clinical contexts rather than explicitly social ones, which is, I think, one of the more interesting results of this review. The cloud suggests that while risk is discussed frequently, the social dimensions of the risk might be underdeveloped. Notably absent or very small are words like justice, equity, identity, access, policy, or regulation. And this absence supports one of the key findings of the review. Societal, ethical, and governance-related issues are significantly less visible than biological and clinical discussions. And their minimal presence in the word cloud suggests that these topics are either underrepresented in the literature or treated as secondary. And let's now move to details and to divided sections. So also, one of the interesting things to add is that analyzing these documents, most of them address actually not longevity biotechnologies, but geroscience. And this reflects the fact that geroscience and the scientific and biologically founded ideas and efforts targeting aging are relatively new. As I mentioned, it refers back to only 2013, when this article, The Hallmarks of Aging, by Lopez Otin and co-workers, was published. Here you can also see how vastly cited it was and accessed. So most articles are at the stage of geroscience. There are not many articles that actually address some interventions because they are just not yet developed to a scale where it would be implemented. And another thing is translational geroscience. So these are efforts to translate geroscience, which is the basic science, into actionable interventions, so into longevity biotechnology. So when it comes to the science and technology backgrounds, we have many approaches, many research directions, and many potential or existing interventions that are present in the literature. So what I'm trying to say is that the efforts to try the path to target the biological foundations of aging are very diverse. We have, let's start from senolytics. These are drugs designed to selectively remove senescent cells, so cells that are no longer divide, but release inflammatory signals and contribute to aging process. Sorry. So then we have mTOR inhibitors, especially rapamycin, which regulates growth and metabolism. We also have other metabolic interventions. We have epigenetic reprogramming, epigenetic biomarkers and clocks, telomere-based biomarkers, xenotherapeutics, more broadly, gerotherapeutics, neural health interventions, as well as AI-supported personalized geromedicine. So one of the interesting observations is that the dominant framing of geroscience is aging society? So across many papers, population aging is presented not only as a biomedical challenge, but also as a major social and economic transformation. A central idea that emerges from the document is that aging populations motivate the search for interventions that can extend health span. In this sense, biomedical interventions and innovations are closely linked to social needs. So if societies are living longer, then maintaining physical function, cognitive capacity, and independence becomes a collective priority. And here we see technological problem definition and technological problem solution proposition. This narrative creates a bridge between the biology of aging and public policy agendas. The literature also highlights several areas where aging populations are expected to have concrete implications, and one of them is retirement policy, where extended healthy years might require rethinking traditional timelines of work and pension systems. Another is long-term care, as delaying frailty or dependency could significantly reshape care infrastructures. We also see discussions about workforce planning, focusing on how longer, healthier lives might challenge and change the labor markets, the availability of skilled workers, or intergenerational dynamics in employment. And finally, many documents mention the social role of older adults, suggesting that interventions targeting aging could influence how older people participate in communities, contribute to society, or experience social inclusion or exclusion. An interesting point raised in the paper is a specific position of women. Women are often highlighted as a group that could particularly benefit from rate control interventions because they carry caregiving responsibilities. They also face cumulative economic disadvantages and experience unique reproductive health transitions. When it comes to funding, what becomes clear is that the field is increasingly shaped by private capital, and this brings some worries, at least to some degree visible in the scientific literature. So we have foundations, billionaire philanthropies, and especially tech investors that play a significant role in financing high-risk, long-term projects aimed at developing gerotherapeutics and extending human lifespan. And this shift toward private investment creates a specific narrative around the field, but also creates some objections, some worry from another side. And the need for equitable and sustainable funding mechanisms is also stressed in this context. And then in contrast, public funding systems such as the NIH and other national research agencies are often described also not as perfect. So here we have other challenges to overcome. They are described as too slow, too conservative, or too limited to support what some authors call moonshot longevity science. When it comes to goals present in the literature, I think we can divide them into three categories for a bit of a simplification. So there are technical goals, among which there is a goal to develop a better definition of aging, to be able to actually have the hallmarks to which scientists can refer and based on which interventions can be created, and to develop working interventions. Then There are also ideological goals present that underpin the whole endeavor. So improvement of the quality of life is very often mentioned, and it is very interesting to reflect on how good life in here is defined. And very often, good life is defined as healthy young body, which is obtained through extending mainly health span. But on the other hand, other arguments state that good quality of life is also connected to the maximal or average lifespan. So this is the argument that good life is also long life, perhaps as long as possible. And then there are also systemic goals mentioned to change healthcare, because as I mentioned at the beginning, the Geroscience hypothesis states that many illnesses connected with old age are actually caused by biological mechanisms of aging. And the hypothesis is that if we manage to target aging, if we understand aging on the biological level better, then we will be able to, through, let's say, healing people from aging, also heal them or prevent them from obtaining illnesses connected with old age. And with this vision, we have a vision of transforming healthcare in general. So the transformed healthcare would not treat people from illnesses of old age, but they would prevent them from them through just avoiding people to get old and having illnesses like Alzheimer and others. Okay, so going forward to the visions of the future present in the literature. So what we see is not just speculation, but also competing sociotechnical imaginaries that organized how aging and longevity are made thinkable. Health span extension is frequently framed as a public priority, almost as a moral obligation of aging societies. In this framing, geroscience becomes an instrument for solving the problems of chronic disease, demographic pressure, aligning biomedical ambitions with narratives of public good and economic rationality. This tells us that the future of aging is being configured not only through biology, but through normative assumptions about what a good society looks like. At the same time, there is a clear pressure towards translational geroscience, which positions longevity biotechnology as the inevitable next step. This produces a linear imaginary. We have basic science, then we have the translational pipeline to develop intervention for the societal benefit. But this imaginary hides the contingencies, failures, and political decisions that shape translational trajectories. So the literature rarely asks who decides what counts as successful translation or whose futures are being privileged in that vision. We also have competing future orientations. On one end, a medicalized vision of healthy aging that aims to maintain function and delay decline. On the other, a more transhumanist or radical visions that explicitly seek dramatic life extension. So the coexistence of these imaginaries is interesting because it shows that the field has no single future, only a contested space of possibilities. The literature often presents these visions as parallel rather than competitive, without probing the power dynamics that determine which imaginary gains institutional traction. So rate control interventions, which is slowing or modulating the pace of biological aging, are presented as pragmatic solutions for currently super-aged societies. But again, what is missing is a critical examination of how these interventions model the future as a technocratic problem of managing population aging, rather than rethinking, for example, infrastructures of care, labor, or intergenerational relations. Some authors call for wisdom-oriented science, integrating the social sciences and humanities perspectives, but also planetary health perspectives with geroscience. And I think this is an interesting and important attempt to broaden the imaginary beyond individual optimization. But these ideas appear as normative gestures rather than deeply theorized alternatives for now. And I think they are very worth expanding. And notably, what is absent from much of the literature is a deeper interrogation of global inequalities, the geopolitics of longevity innovation, and the environmental implications of extended life trajectories. Also, there is little attention to alternative imaginaries coming from outside many American biomedical discourse. For example, imaginaries that might challenge the assumption that extending life is always a desirable or necessary societal goal. Okay, so this slide brings us to social attitudes towards radical life extension and some empirical research concerning social attitudes. So what we see across these studies, here we only have a set of examples, is that the public attitudes are much more complex and much more nuanced than the typical for or against divide that we see in the media debates. For example, focus group research may show that people support interventions that prevent age-related decline, things like maintaining mobility, cognitive function, or independence. But as soon as the discussion moves from healthy aging to radical life extension of lifespan, the attitudes might become more cautious. People start raising questions about meaning, identity, inequality, and whether the extremely long life would still feel like a good life. And also another interesting thing is that there is some connection between health span and lifespan, at least in a sense. I mean, of course, there are many, but I'm trying to touch on the sense that the perception of life extension might be different depending on whether the lifespan extension is connected with health span extension or not. And the last thing on this slide is that there is actually only this one article, but I think a very interesting and innovative approach to the discourse around longevity biotechnology attitudes research. So investigating how surveys present questions, what scenarios are used in social attitude studies, and how these framings themselves might shape public responses. So in the article, Public Alignment with Longevity Biotechnology, Analysis of Framing in Service and Opinion Studies, Alberto Aparicio questions how the framing itself, how the presentation of longevity biotechnology might shape, might influence the responses. Okay, and now the topic of governance and regulation. So what becomes very clear in this part of the literature is that governance debates around geroscience are framed through a relatively narrow set of institutional and regulatory questions. Much of the discussion centers on whether aging should be recognized as a treatable condition, because this would allow clinical studies, perhaps on humans in the future. But from a critical perspective, this is not simply a definitional issue. It's a political act of boundary work, and we can think about potential social implications and the changing meanings of aging, life, changing relationships, at changing social dynamics, if aging is actually defined as a condition, as an illness, and as a treatable condition. So I think this is one of the most interesting questions when it comes to the governance of geroscience, and in connection with geroscience, what may be the consequences of having the definition of aging as a disease? Because classifying aging as a disease reconfigures obligations, redirects funding streams as well, and shifts the epistemic authority towards the biomedical actors, what is also very interesting, who stand to reshape the field's future. What's missing in many papers, I think, is the recognition that this classificatory move also forecloses alternative imaginaries of aging that are not disease-oriented. Similarly, the call for regulatory reform to enable clinical trials targeting aging reflects on a deep entanglement between scientific ambition and infrastructural governance. A more explicit critical thread emerges around investor influence. So we have tech billionaires and venture capital that do more than just fund the field. They import a particular innovation logic, one oriented around perhaps speed, more disruption, and high upside futures. Yet the literature often remains polite, describing these actors as accelerators rather than as agents who actively reconfigure epistemic priorities, risk thresholds, and public accountability. Finally, although many authors call for improved policy frameworks, the proposals often remain technocratic. There is surprisingly little discussion about whose aging futures are being institutionalized or which publics are imagined as beneficiaries or stakeholders. The literature pays very little attention to democratic oversight, global governance, asymmetries, or how aging as target might be governed, both in the US-centric biomedical infrastructures, but also outside. Okay, and then let's transition to another interesting thread of analysis, which is under the concept of bioconstitutionalism, introduced by Professor Sheila Jasanoff. So one of the questions is, how is aging framed? And to summarize many of the things that we've already talked about, it is mainly shaped in biological terms, and in consequence, it is often missing the bigger picture available in other fields. So the flow of ideas, the exchange, the influence is not as visible as it could be, and as it would be valuable to have it. But the positive sign, I think, is that we see an emerging interdisciplinary conversation. So there are some signs of a potential paradigm shift around aging definition, in which aging is seen and defined not as a natural, normal state, but rather as something not only undesirable, but also not necessarily even normal, something treatable, something that can be under human control, something that can be governed through technology. And so this is an interesting question for me, I think. I'm curious about your opinion as well. The question whether health and youth is the new norm in comparison to aging. Of course, this is not a completely new trend. Paulina said the medicalization is the concept here. Thank you. It should be on the slide. But to finish the thought, we have the trend that health and youth is the norm, in contrast to aging. But I think geroscience is potentially bringing it to another level, and perhaps also onto a new scale as well, financially, as well when we think about the global dynamics, global health system access, technology access, and the perception of youth and health. And here, a small quote from one of the articles. When it comes to defining aging, I think this quote really reflects, and this is from a document from 2024, so just published last year. I think it really reflects how aging is biomedicalized, and how it's defined in the biological terms, but also actually embedded in the idea of social progress and the idea of progress that underlies this vision. So, due to the complexity and multifactorial nature, aging is not easy to operationalize for scientific purposes beyond the mere counting of days after birth. So here he's talking about that there's even a problem to operationalize and define aging within biology. There is a progressive decline of health with passage of time, but there is heterogeneity in the aging progress. Some people undergo gradual changes with age, while others experience a rapid decline. But to make progress, a universal concept of aging should be available that can be operationalized and quantified. Armed with such conceptualization, we could start testing the geroscience hypothesis and, hopefully, translate it into community health and medicine. And we are slowly approaching the finish of the presentation, but still a few slides to go. So another topic that is recurring in the literature, however, I think it could be much more visible than it is now, is the topic or the topics of equity and justice. So they emerge as some of the most persistent themes in the literature. However, what we see across the documents is a concern that longevity biotechnology could generate new forms of biological inequality, a stratification not merely of income or access, but biological time of life. Some authors explicitly use the language of the haves and the have-nots and will-nots, so people who have access or have not access or will not use it by choice, signaling the fear that life-extending or health span extending interventions might become concentrated among those who already have benefits socioeconomically. At the same time, discussion of equity are not limited to abstract fears of inequality. The literature repeatedly highlights that women, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ+ individuals, and low-income groups are already underrepresented in clinical research more broadly. And this pattern risks being reproduced or maybe even amplified in longevity science, even if we are talking about samples for study and which groups are being taken into consideration in research. So this is particularly important because aging trajectories are not uniform. Structural determinants of health, exposure to chronic stress, or differential access to care all shape how aging is lived and experienced across populations. We also have some papers that address geroscience and the idea of radical life extension from the philosophical and religious angle. Less frequently in the literature compared to policy or equity concerns, but when they do surface, they raise fundamental questions about what life extension means and how it reshapes existing moral frameworks. So some of the concerns, for example, are built on the religious imaginaries, particularly within Christian traditions, drawing on a contrast between the theological idea of eternity, which is framed as a spiritual, non-technological promise, in contrast to the transhumanist ambition of what some authors call engineered immortality. This tension is important because it illustrates how longevity research isn't only a biomedical project, but also intersects with religious ideas and philosophical ideas and other traditions of thought that have built approaches and perspectives of the meaning of life and death across centuries. And then one of the concerns that is actually the most heavily analyzed is a set of discussions focusing on ecological and demographic implications of radical life extension. So the ecological arguments usually build on the demographic assumptions and the demographic scenarios. So a recurring argument is that the fear that extending human lifespan at scale could intensify ecological pressures, from resource consumption to carbon emissions to stress on already fragile ecosystems. Some authors frame this as a classical overpopulation concern. If people live significantly longer without corresponding changes in fertility, we amplified the demand for food, energy, and infrastructure. But what is interesting from an STS perspective is that these concerns are not only quantitative, but also normative. They question which forms of life and which forms of longevity are considered comparable within a livable planet. And another argument is that the longer, healthier lives could contribute to ecological stewardship, actually. For instance, by enabling older adults to engage longer in climate action, or by reducing the healthcare burdens associated with aging populations. Okay, I think last few slides. So it is very interesting, I think, to reflect on what aspects are conceptualized as risks versus uncertainties, and even what kinds of perspectives and areas are considered when risks are being imagined and constructed. So the most often are biomedical risks, and much more rarely any other societal risks. However, within the societal risks, I would say that demographic challenges and ecological potential challenges are the most often conceptualized. Some other aspects that can be thought of as, or are thought of as risks in the literature are regulatory risks. This is more for geroscience, I would say, because I mean, it concerns potential misclassification of aging. So if aging is not properly classified in the regulatory framework, perhaps clinical trials would not be possible. Then we have some societal risks mentioned, some political, economical risks, and some moral or ethical risks. But also, the line between risks and uncertainties is not very firm at this point in this field. Within uncertainties, we also have, for example, the biological uncertainties such as the mechanisms of aging, epistemic uncertainties, validity of the identified biomarkers, predictive limits of aging models, etc. We also have uncertainties concerning regulation, distributional effects, demographic futures, perhaps identity implications, but also uncertainties when it comes to public attitudes that might be changing when in time and in different contexts, uncertainty about the ethical, not only perspectives, but also regulations, but also uncertainties about the political and economical context. So for example, investor influence, market uncertainty, and geopolitical asymmetries. And the last one, okay, the one before the last one will be facts making and boundary work. So I think some observations here. One is that when the evidence is very amplified, the evidence-based science, for example, approach is very amplified in geroscience. Often rigorous scientific methods are mentioned, that there is a need for them, or there's a need for more empirical research or attitude studies. So we have a strong domination of, let's say, classical scientific methods in this discourse, which is quite not as surprising, of course, because we are talking about scientific literature review, but still, that's, for example, inclusion of other kinds of knowledge or other epistemologies is barely recognized in this field. Often we have authority claims also concerning the connection between geroscience and its societal context and implication. For example, the idea of progress, also societal progress, is used as a context and motivation and justification for geroscience to be developed. And the last one is what was missing. So limited engagement with social sciences and humanities beyond ethics can be observed. The field is dominated by biomedical and ethical discussions, much less by the social sciences and humanities more broadly. This means that many important dimensions, such as lived experiences of aging, care infrastructures, or cultural attitudes, are underexplored at this point. There is a lack of public perspectives as well. We know quite little about how different communities understand or evaluate longevity biotechnologies. I think without this, it becomes difficult to design governance frameworks that are democratic, inclusive, or socially responsive. And third, politically and economic questions are thinly covered. Private funding, investor priorities, and techno-optimistic narratives increasingly shape the direction of the field, yet scholarly analysis rarely interrogates these power dynamics or their implications for access and justice. We also see quite limited engagement with global inequalities topic, with most literature coming from high-income contexts, and environmental and sustainability considerations, which are crucial in discussions about future demographic structures, are also underexplored. And finally, few papers offer empirical data. The field relies heavily on conceptual reflection and commentary, especially when it comes to the societal aspects, rather than research conducted with communities, policymakers, patients, older adults, etc. And this is it from my side. Thank you very much for your focus for such a long time. These are some example and inspirational questions, but not sure if they will be needed. Thank you, and I'm very curious about your thoughts, comments, and questions.
Yeah, thank you, Oliwia, for this really rich and interesting, extremely interesting presentation. And yeah, now we have around 15-20 minutes for a discussion. So anyone who has want to ask a question, take a part in the discussion, please raise your hand and I'll pass the floor to you.